time where heroes lived. People like Salahuddin, who gave his life for Islam, our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah send His peace and blessings on His Prophet Muhammad. We welcome you here to our next episode looking at the history of Islam. Today, insha'Allah, we are going to be looking at the history of one of the most well-known places to have been part of the Muslim Empire. It is a name that when you think of it, it evokes beautiful images of green gardens, of fountains, of amazing palaces, a period of our history that every Muslim is proud of, but at the same time longs for. And this is the history of Al-Andalus, also known as Islamic Spain. So inshallah, what we're going to be doing is taking a look at this specific area. We're going to actually take 3 episodes to look at the history of Andalus. Because Andalus, really, it's one of the places, not just the fact that it has such an immense history, and there's so much to talk about, but also because of the fact that it's full of lessons. It's full of lessons because it was a place that was conquered. It was a place that was held by the Muslims for 800 years and really was the shining light of Europe and the Muslim empire at that time. And it was also a land that was lost. So we're going to look at, first of all, how it was taken. We're going to take a look at the legacy of how Al-Andalus was. And then lastly, we're going to look at the decline and the reasons for the decline. Because as we said for this show, we want to discuss not just the history, not just the dates and the names and the places. What we want to take a look at, insha'Allah, are the lessons that we take from this. The lessons of how it was conquered and lost. The lessons of what we can learn from the history of Andalus that will give us pride and understanding, insha'Allah. So I'm going to take a look at a few points that many of us we already know a little bit about, and maybe some things that we don't know about. So we know that Al-Andalus is basically located in what we call the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. It's part of far Western Europe. And the Muslims, they ruled it for approximately 800 years. Now, when we say 800 years,
it's so much.
800 years, it's a long time.
A long time.
800 years, imagine, you're not...
Many generations.
How many generations do you think? 800 years.
Maybe 16.
We're talking about, possibly 50 generations. At least 50 generations
50.
Of Muslims. They were born in Andalus, their parents were born in Andalus. If you look at Spain itself, Spain as a modern country, after the fall of Andalus in 1492 until today, Spain has only existed for 519 years. 519 years. That means Al-Andalus is almost twice as old as Spain that we know today. This is the legacy. If you want to understand Spain and its history, Portugal and its history is Islamic. Its history is Muslim. This is a Muslim land. By definition of its history, it's a Muslim land.
A lot of people don't know that.
A lot of people aren't aware of this. I mean, most Muslims know about Al-Andalus. They've heard, Spain used to be Muslim. Spain used to be, this light whilst Europe was in the Dark Ages. Many have heard it. Most Muslims know about this.
They don't know that the Andalus, the Spain, is more Islamic than Hispanic.
Indeed. The history of Spain is more a part of Islam and than of Spain, the European country.
But the word Andalus, does it have a meaning, Andalus? What does it mean?
There is a lot of discussion about this, the etymology of the word Andalus. And you find there are a few opinions as to how this word came about. Some of them, one of the most common opinions is it comes from the word Vandal. The Vandals were a group of Europeans coming from around Germany, Central Europe, that conquered a lot of this area. This I disagree with. To me, I believe the most correct opinion is that there was an island, and it used to be known as the island of Andalus. It ended with a Z, which in Spanish, depending on when in time you look at it, it would have either been pronounced as a Z or a S. So it was called the island of Andalus. It was actually renamed later as the island of Tarifa. It was given a Muslim name. but originally it was called Andalus. So what happened was when the Muslims came through, they took the name of this island and named the whole area after this. And we find many precedents for this. India, for example, the name India is taken from the river Sindh. So from the river Sindh, they named everything after this, after the Sindh, which eventually became the Hind. Italy, for example, southern Italy, there was a tribe called the Italians in Calabria. So when the Greeks came through, they named everything else after this. Africa as well. Africa was named after a tribe called the Afari from Tunisia. Everything after that.
Barbarian tribe.
One of the Berber tribes. So we see there are precedents for this. So this is generally accepted where the name Andalus comes from, and I believe this is the most correct opinion. So now we're going to be taking a look at Andalus itself and part of its legacy. We know that Andalus was a place where you had, they called it the convivencia. Convivencia means living together in harmony. If you look at Europe today, we know what happened recently in Norway. You remember what happened in Norway, Yusuf? Tell us what
Andrew
happened.
Breivik killed about 100 persons because he said that he was a knight of Christianity, voting against all what is not Christian in Europe.
Unfortunately, you find a lot of Europeans are saying Islam is not compatible with Europe. Africans are not welcome in Europe. We can't tolerate them. And this is something amazing because in Andalus, you had Africans, you had Berbers, Europeans, Muslims, Christians, Jews, living together for the most part of their history in complete harmony. You had what was called the golden age of Judaism, because we know in much of Europe the Jews were oppressed. In Italy they were oppressed. In England they were oppressed. Everywhere they went they were oppressed. Where did they find freedom of religion? In Al-Andalus.
And that's what Islamic law teaches. Everybody has rights over everyone else, even
Indeed.
no matter what religion you are.
Indeed, it was from this, the Islamic understanding, dealing with Ahl al-Kitab, as Allah commands, to give them freedom of their religion. Islam gave them the freedom that other religions didn't have. And from this golden age, I'll just give one example and a little bit of an interesting snippet that most of us will find interesting. The most famous Jewish scholar of all time, his name is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, or Musa bin Maimun. They called him Maimonides in English. Now Maimonides, you can compare him to Ibn Taymiyyah. He was like the Ibn Taymiyyah of Judaism. He codified a lot of their religion. Now he actually lived in Andalus. So their greatest scholar lived in Andalus. And if you want to read his books, you have to learn how to speak Arabic. His books were written in Arabic.
In Arab.
The majority of the major works of the Jewish religion are written in Arabic.
There's nothing translated?
Of course they translated it, but if you want to go to the original, you have to know Arabic.
That's
Yes,
amazing,
and-
really amazing.
Yes, and they have it dialect of Arabic called Judeo-Arabic. It
Yes.
was only a dialect of Arabic.
They would write Arabic with Hebrew letters. It's an amazing thing, and this is how Maimonides wrote. Now, what's interesting about Maimonides is when he actually talked about the Muslims, because with it, the Jews, for example, they have laws for the Jews and laws for the non-Jews. For the non-Jews, they have only 7 laws they say a person has to follow. And Maimonides, he said the Muslims, because of the respect that he had for the Muslims, he said the Muslims follow all of these 7 laws. And according to Judaism, Muslims will go to Jannah. He said according to Judaism, Muslims will go to paradise. This is the words of the greatest scholar of Judaism who lived in Andalus. Look
And-
at this respect.
And they lived in peace for 800 years.
They lived, not absolutely, there were problems. Over 800 years, there were some downsides. And we're going to talk about these later on, inshallah, towards the later episodes. But most of the Muslim rulers granted them respect.
But they survived. It was like maybe, for example, in France, for example, Nostradamus, he was a Jew who converted to Christianity, or many other Jews throughout history, they converted to Christianity.
No. And wherever they were in Andalus, they found freedom. Muslim, Christian, Jew. The Muslim rulers gave freedom, so people would immigrate to Andalus. This is amazing. They would immigrate to the Muslim lands for the freedom. Now, looking at how Andalus actually came about, we know that Islam spread from the Arabian Peninsula into North Africa. Now, in that early stage, it was said one of the Muslim generals, they'd conquered Al-Maghrib, they'd conquered all of North Africa. And it said, you know, there's a story that he got to the edge of the ocean and he looked at the ocean before him. And I said, if I knew there was land across this ocean, I would sail there and I would liberate this land and give them Islam.
Whoa.
If I knew there was land.
Whoa. And this leader, his name?
This general, his name eludes me at the moment. Allahu A'lam, I can't remember exactly who it was. But it was one of the Muslim generals. It said that these were his words. Now, little did he know, there was land across there, which we know is Europe. So later on, what had happened is the Muslims had taken power. They had taken all of Maghrib, and they started to deal with the Christians. Because if you've seen the map of Europe, like we'll take inshallah, look at the map of Europe, you see how you have North Africa, and then you have Spain, and the two almost meet. This is the edge of the Mediterranean. You could almost swim across. So what happened was they started to deal with the Christians. Now, the way in which Islam entered into Al-Andalus, it's a very interesting story, because in the last episode, we spoke about Italy. Do you remember, Yusuf, how Islam entered into Italy? What was the main cause of it?
The main cause was, I think that they first conquered Spain, and I think yes, the Euphemus. He told Muslims to came to help him.
Exactly.
He called Muslims to came.
You find that he actually, because of disunity amongst the Christians, he invited the Muslims to conquer Sicily. We find exactly the same thing happened with Andalus. What had happened was in the year 711, we find that there was a king, and he was the king of most of Spain, and his name was Roderick. Now, Roderick was a Visigoth. The Visigoths were actually a tribe that came from Germany, and they ended up pushing westwards and conquering most of Spain, Portugal, all of this area. Now, these people were originally Arian. They weren't Catholic. They were Arian. Has anyone heard this word Arian before?
Yes. It was like they don't believe that Jesus is the son of is a god.
Exactly.
And they were persecuted in all parts of the world of Western Christianity, because they were regarding them, they were like
they saw them as heretics.
Yeah, like heretics.
So you see, the Arians, they refused to believe that Jesus was God. So they were very close to Islam in their belief. They were almost Muslims, you could say. What happened, though, was the Visigoths, when they went into Spain, they actually converted to Catholicism, and they started to oppress the other Christians. The Arians, they oppressed them, and the Jews, they oppressed them. Anyone who wouldn't worship the Trinity, they would become oppressed. So Roderick, he took away the rights of the Jews, of the Arians, and many other religious groups. So these groups became to resent him.
And he used to be Arian himself.
He himself didn't used to be, but the Visigoths, meaning his forefathers, were. But of course, later they became Catholics, and they started fighting on behalf of the Catholic Church.
Against the people and maybe some nobles.
Yes, and you find they put heavy taxes upon the people. So most of the people really didn't like Roderick. As a ruler, they weren't happy with him. Now, what happened around this time? There was a ruler of a place called Ceuta. Ceuta is actually, it's still part of Spain today. It's in North Africa, very close to Morocco. And the ruler of that area, his name was Julian. Now, Julian was an Arian, and he really did not like Roderick. Now, what happened was, he actually sent his daughter to go study in Toledo, in one of the cities of the Iberian Peninsula. So she was living at the same place as Roderick. And it said that Roderick raped her and got her pregnant.
Oh.
Now you could imagine, if this was your daughter, you've sent her to go study as a good, trying to win favor with the king. He rapes your daughter, he gets her pregnant. You're not going to be happy, are you?
This is act of war.
It's almost a declaration of war. And Julian took it as a declaration of war. So he said, he actually plans. He said, how am I going to get revenge on Roderick? So he went to North Africa. And many people say that Julian himself was a Berber. He was a native North African, but a Christian, an Arian. So he went to North Africa, and he went to the governor of the Maghrib, the governor of Morocco, whose name was Musa ibn Nusayr. And he went to Musa and he said to him, let's work together. I will give you my boats, I will support you with money and troops, and we fight together against Roderick.
And this is a Muslim helping him?
They were appealing to the Muslims. Musa ibn Usayr, he was the commander of the Muslims in North Africa. So this Christian came to the Muslims and said, let us fight together to liberate...
It is interesting. Also in the story of Italy, it was like the Christians, they didn't ask help. They didn't ask help from Christians. They asked from Muslims.
Yes.
It is very interesting.
Because they found the Muslims were fair. The Muslims gave them more freedom than they could expect from the Catholic kings.
And the Christians were oppressing their own people.
Yes, they were oppressing their own people. Even though they were supposedly brothers in the same faith, they oppressed each other.
And
So-
what was Julian proposing to give the Muslims out of this war?
Julian said, you attack the land, you can have the land. I want Roderick dead. That's basically what he said.
This is revenge.
All he wanted was revenge.
And also Roderick, he took a throne from the son of the last king, from the visitor. He left the sons, and Roderick took the throne.
Yes.
Yes.
The sons of Witiz, they actually went to Ceuta, and they were living with Julian. So they were pushing Julian, go to the Muslims, go to the Muslims. And he agreed. Now, Musa ibn Nusayr, who was the ruler of the Maghrib at the time, he was cautious. I mean, you're not just going to go into a land just like that because someone tells you to come. So what he did is he appointed one of his generals. And this general is one of the true heroes of Islam. His name is Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah.
Very famous name.
A very,
in our
very famous
Islamic
name.
history.
Now, Tariq was appointed as the general. Tariq was a Berber. He was a native North African. So Musa said to him, go and, check out the situation. So Tariq actually appointed one of his generals, whose name was Tarif ibn Malik. He said, go and check out the coast. Send some boats across and see what's going on. So Tarif, he actually sent some Muslims. They went to the coast and they found that every Christian they met welcomed them. They said, please go back to North Africa and bring troops and liberate us. Amazing. They were asking the Muslims to liberate them.
Because
So
they
you-
weren't very fond of Roderick.
They were not fond of Roderick at all. Nobody, you can't say nobody, the majority really resented the rule of Roderick. So they wanted the Muslims to come to liberate them.
Sure, in this time Muslims was strong and
It's very-
not have any problems
Of
inside.
course.
It's very interesting. Nowadays in Palestine, the keepers, the workers in security are Muslims. In churches, the workers in the security are Muslims. They are not Jews. The majority of them are Muslims. It is also how the Christians, they know that the best helper are Muslim.
If they're just, you'll find it the best. So Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah, he prepared an army. He originally got 1,700 men. They took sail from North Africa. And between North Africa and Spain, you have an island. They landed on this island and set that up as their base. That island became known as Jabal Tariq. Jabal Tariq, we know it today as Gibraltar. So we find Gibraltar is actually named after this Muslim general, Jabal Tariq, named after Tariq ibn Ziyad.
Wow.
So they made this base, and then they actually they went onto the lands. They landed in Spain, and again they found very little resistance. The majority of the people that they saw welcomed them. They welcomed the Muslims.
Yeah.
Now Roderick, he heard about this.
It's strange.
It's very strange. It's amazing that they were really welcomed. And the Muslims found very little resistance to begin with. So this is the story of the initial landing in the Iberian Peninsula. We're going to go to a very short break, inshallah. After this break, we're going to continue with the rest of the story of the conquest of Al-Andalus. So dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment, and we look forward for you to joining us.
Our legacy. Our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the program. We're here looking at Islamic history, focusing on the conquest of Al-Andalus. So as we mentioned, this great Muslim hero, this General Tariq ibn Ziyad, rahimahullah, he's taken 1,700 men. They've landed in Gibraltar, which was named after Tariq ibn Ziyad. Now they've went forward and actually landed on the Spanish mainland, the Iberian Peninsula. They found very little resistance. However, King Roderick heard about the Muslims. So he decided to gather a large army, and the Muslims received word of this. So Tariq, he actually requested for 7,000 more troops to come. So 7,000 more Berber troops. All of these were Berbers at the time. There were no Arabs. Tariq and his army were all Berbers, native North Africans.
Muslims, all of them were Muslims.
All of them were Muslims, alhamdulillah.
Sunnah.
All from Ahl Sunnah, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
So what happened was 7,000 more troops joined them so that they could actually face King Roderick.
It is also interesting that Musa ibn Nusayr, his origins are from Iraq. His fathers were Christians.
Yes.
So you have all army made of Berbers, and the main commander is maybe Babylonian or something like this.
Yeah, you
This
see
was
how Islam united
Without
all
Arabs, the conquesting without Arabs at the beginning.
of them. Indeed. And it's interesting because the race is going to play a part in Andalus later on. So this is why I'm always focusing. This was a Berber army, because later on we're going to see why this caused friction amongst the groups, unfortunately. And this was one of the reasons for the downfall of Andalus. So Tariq, rahimahullah, he took his army, and they actually got to a place which was called Wadi Laka. Wadi, the valley of Laka. Now later in Spanish they call this Guadalate. You find whenever you've got Guada at the start of a word, it originally comes from a wadi. For example, you have a river that's called Guadi al-Kibir. Wadi al-Kibir comes from Al-Wadi al-Kabir. So you say the place names, of course, most of the places, especially in the south of Spain, you'll find they either come from Arabic or they were actually named by the Muslims. Zaragoza is the Arabic form of
Sarakuta.
Caesar Augusta, the original form of this. All of these names, you'll find that there is an Arabic background, or the Muslims actually named these.
It's
So they
800
met.
years.
Yeah, of course. After 800 years, you're going to have this. Now, it's amazing that, remember we said there were 7,000 Muslims. 7,000. Roderick met them with 25,000 Christians. Now, you can imagine the numbers. 25,000 as compared to 7,000. The odds are far in favor of the Christians. The manpower alone is enough reason to suggest why they would win. But we see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٍ كَثِيرَةً بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ.
And it shows how much they trusted in Allah by just bringing 7,000 people, and they knew how much King Roderick would bring.
They faced, even if they didn't know what he was bringing, Allah says, how many times a small army has overcome a large army by the permission of Allah.
Allahumma sabir. Allah is with patience.
Indeed.
Patient ones.
So we see time and time again in Islamic history, when the Muslims are a minority, they're victorious. When they're a majority, you find a lot of the time that they're defeated. Because numbers alone, we learned this from, for example, the Battle of Hunain. When the Muslims, with the Prophet ﷺ, they saw their numbers, and many of them thought, our numbers alone, it has to mean victory. But Allah taught them a lesson showing that numbers mean nothing. Allah says, a small army overcomes a large army by the permission of Allah on many occasions. So this group of 7,000 Muslims faced 25,000 Christians. You find that the battle began, and many of the Christians instantly turned upon Roderick. They didn't join the Muslims, but they just left Roderick.
Why?
Because you'll find many of them were not Catholics. They were Arians, and they preferred the Muslims than Roderick. You find Roderick, someone who goes around raping women, getting them pregnant. This is not a man with high morals.
And also illegitimate king, and there's many things.
Many things that his people, they weren't happy with. So they turned against him. And the Muslims had a resounding victory. It was said very few Muslims died. By the end of the battle, you would have one Muslim soldier with 10 Christian slaves. He would tie up 10 of them in their chains. One Muslim would be taking 10 Christians.
Whoa.
Because most of them prefer to be taken as slaves and to be, later to be let free than to die. For what? For their king? And Roderick, by the permission of Allah, was killed. So you find the Muslims had very, very little resistance. Now remember, at this time, Musa ibn Nusayr, the governor of Al-Maghrib, he told Tariq, you are only to go scout the situation. You're not going there to invade the lands. You're just going to check the situation out. But Tariq has just seen what's happened. They've just killed their enemy. The king Roderick has been defeated. There's nobody in power, because we know the Visigoths, they were a small part of society. Maybe 2 to 5% of Spain were Visigoths.
And they were the high class.
They were the high class. Now they've been taken out. Their leadership has been cut off. There's a power vacuum. So Tariq had a decision to make. Disobey Musa, his governor, and take advantage of this, or go back and miss this chance. Because if he doesn't take this chance, someone else is going to take power. So he decided to disobey Musa with the intention that Musa is going to understand. And
this
so
is
they
right
pushed
or
on.
wrong?
Of course, what he did, it's an honorable thing. But we're going to see what the response of Musa was, inshallah.
And the battle take place for one day or many
This happened
days?
in a day. This happened over a very short period. I believe it actually was one day. Just like that, they were taken.
200,000.
25,000. But the majority of them left. This is why the Muslims found little resistance. They would go to the next town and the people would welcome them. And so what the Muslims would do, this is a very important point. What the Muslims would do is they would conquer a city, and they didn't have enough men to keep that city. Because if they put men to look after it, they can't go conquer the next town.
It's only 7,000.
A very small army. So what they would do is the Jews of the city would come to the Muslims and say, you go conquer that town, and we will defend this for you. Why? Because the Jews wanted the Muslims there. They realized, the justice of the Muslims. So the Jews helped the Muslims in conquering Al-Andalus. Now we see, unfortunately, in recent times, some friction between Jews and Muslims. But if we look at Andalus, the Muslims and the Jews were the closest allies. If it wasn't for the Jews, the conquering of Andalus wouldn't have gone so quickly. So you see, in the end, of course, you're not going to rely upon them. We don't have to rely upon them or anybody else. But you will find, when it benefits them, they will fight alongside you. If you bring justice to them, and you deal with them fairly, and don't oppress them, they will welcome you. Just like the Jews and the Christians welcomed the Muslims in conquering Al-Quds under Omar.
It shows you how trusted and respected the Muslims were.
It
back
does.
then.
And you see, when you have this level of justice, even people who might be your enemy are going to be with you. So this is an important lesson to actually take a look at. Now what happened was, at this point, Musa ibn al-Nusayr had heard that the Muslims are now conquering the lands. So he quickly decided to push forward to Andalus. And it was said that he actually caught up with Tariq. So here's Tariq meeting his commander. General comes and he meets Musa. The first thing Musa does is he slaps Tariq across the face.
Whoa.
He slaps him across the face.
After he conquered all this.
And then he congratulates him. He said, the slap is for disobeying me. The slap is for having disobeyed my orders. But now I congratulate you upon conquering these lands. Let us go together and conquer these lands. So you see, of course, he was upset that Tariq disobeyed him. But at the same time, he understood why Tariq did this. And so, of course, he forgave him, and they pushed on through. Within 3 years' time, the Muslims had gone from the south of Spain, what we call today Andalusia, up to the Pyrenees Mountains. The Pyrenees Mountains are a natural border between France and the Iberian Peninsula. 3 years. Within 3 years, all of Spain was conquered.
It's a short time.
A very short time.
Nothing.
This shows, and this is a small army we're talking. They didn't have a very large army.
Especially in that time, with that advance of technology, and that advance. Nowadays we have trucks, we have airplanes, and in that time, in 3 years, conquering so much land.
Yes. 3 years, it would take someone probably 3 years to walk across Spain today. And they did it in that time. So you see, alhamdulillah, most of Al-Andalus, as we call it now, came under the rule of the Muslims.
And it was just the Berbers attacking them with no other help from the other Muslim
Some
nations?
Arabs joined them later on, but still that core army was the Berber army who liberated Al-Andalus. Now, at this point, you find Arianism. Remember how we mentioned you had the Arians, the monotheistic Christians. They disappeared. You don't have any Arians left in Spain today. Why? Because they became Muslim.
Mm.
The majority of the Aryans quickly embraced Islam. Some Jews, some Catholics began to embrace Islam. So Islam really became established in Al-Andalus. Now there was one area which the Muslims didn't conquer, which was in the northwest of the country. This became like there was a constant border. They actually called it the desert, which separated the north and the south. A small part of the north, which remained Christian. Now, in this time, Islam began to be established. And you found especially many Jews started immigrating to Al-Andalus.
And was no resistance.
There was very, very little resistance.
Mm.
You know, most of the places, as we said, they welcomed them.
Mm.
And people now started immigrating to Al-Andalus. Especially Jews, they migrated there. Why? Because they found freedom of religion.
Mm.
Most of Europe, they weren't allowed to practice their religion to many degrees. In Italy, they were forced to live in certain areas. Now they come to Andalus, and they say, you're welcome to build your synagogues. You have freedom of religion. A Jew, he can, even, become part of the local government. He can be a successful businessman. He become a scientist, and you're welcome. This is why this was the golden age of Judaism. The people were actually welcome to do all of these things. Now you find as well that many Muslims from all over the world began to immigrate. You found, for example, many of the Arabs decided to start migrating. After the Berbers had conquered Al-Andalus, the Arabs from all over the Middle East now said, let us migrate to Andalus and, take advantage of this land. So, for example, the Arabs who came from Damascus, they settled in a city of Granada. This is where all the people from Damascus went. The Jordanians, they went to the city of Malaga. The Palestinians, they went to the city of Jerez. So you see, they're all going to different cities. The ones from Homs, they went to Seville. The Egyptians, they either settled in Portugal or they went to Murcia in the east of Spain. So you see, each of these cities became dominated by a certain Arab group.
So Andalus was like a paradise on earth for all people. Everybody wants to get in it.
Everybody wanted in because it was cosmopolitan. Everyone was welcome. The weather was temperate, it was nice, it was prosperous. So you find at this time the Arabs started taking over the south. Now remember, we said the Berbers were still up north fighting. Now this caused a lot of jealousy, because the Berbers, they said, we are the ones conquering the lands. We are the ones fighting, putting our lives on the lines. And now the Arabs are coming and taking the cities. And so they actually said, we're going to stop fighting. We're going to go back to the cities and take our share. Now we remember from the Battle of Uhud. We're going to find this point coming up time and time again. Allah says, عَسَيْتُمْ بَعْدَ مَا أَرَاكُمْ مَا تُحِبُّونَ. You disobeyed Allah after you saw that which you loved, which was the ghanima, the treasures, the war booty. So we're not saying the Berbers were sinful in doing this, but they saw that the others were taking the booty, which was the cities.
They could conquer France or something if they hadn't stopped.
It could have been the case, and we're going to see what
Because,
actually happened.
especially that time, I know that the part of South France was in the rule of Visigoths.
Yes, and because of this, the Berbers, they pushed back, and they started to duel with the Arabs, and there was a lot of animosity. Unfortunately, you'll find until today, unfortunately, some still have this sick mentality of racism, that you're an Arab, you're better than a Berber. You're Somali, you're better than an Ethiopian. This is something that's un-Islamic.
We are Muslims.
Yani Allah says, "Inna akramakum 'inda Allahi."
أتقاكم.
The best of you are the ones with
The most
Taqwa.
pious.
the most pious, the most taqwa.
And Islam came to wipe that all out because there's a lot of racism during that time, actually, between different groups. And Islam came to wipe that all out.
No doubt Islam came to eradicate this, but still some people would have this. So you found that the Muslims now, they're pulling back. And as I said, you had in the north, there was actually, there's a river called the Duero. The river Duero, it runs from the north of Portugal through the north of Spain. Everything above this was a part of Spain we call the Asturias. The Asturias, the Muslims never conquered this. They could have conquered this, but the Berbers, they pulled back. And this area, as I called was called the desert of Duero. It wasn't actually a desert, but it became like a desert barrier that the Muslims never conquered. And we find this later came back to bite the Muslims. So this, they pulled back, and we found that they weren't able to conquer much of the land. Now at this time, as Yusuf mentioned, the Muslims, they started to push into France. Because France, as it was right next to Spain, You've just got to go over the Pyrenees Mountains and you're in France. So the Muslims started to conquer the south of France, which we call Septimania. Septimania is this area between, like you've got Andorra and then you've got the south of France. The Muslims started to conquer all of this.
And these Muslims who not Arab army.
This was the United Muslim Army at that point.
Mm.
You know, by that time they got together, and you would have like one army is a Berber army, one is an Arab army. They might be, you know, divided amongst ethnic lines. They might be united, but they started to take France. Now this, and even northern Italy, they started to push through to northern Italy. When we talked about Italy, we spoke about this. How they actually started to march upon Rome. But of course, they had to consolidate this part of France first.
Some Muslims in that time thought that from Spain they came to Constantinople. They thought because they advanced so rapidly, so they thought that
It seemed.
Yeah, imagine from
seemed
Spain
they could just walk
to
straight through.
Constantinople. But it could be possible.
This was the dream of the Muslims, because Muslims were taking Europe on the east. Now they're taking them from the west. Now, what we call France now, at that time they were called, you know, the Franks, the Frankish Empire. They were probably the only real power left in Europe. Other than the Franks, there was no real army. Nobody had power. So the Franks realized that it was basically up to them to stop the Muslims. If they didn't stop the Muslims, and, you know, historians debate this, some say the Muslims would have walked through Europe and taken the whole thing without a fight. So one of the leaders of the France, his name was Charles. Charles, he led an army, and he pushed forward to meet the Muslims. And his was the only real army that the Muslims had to stand up to. The rest of the armies, you know, the German armies, all of these, they were very small and, you know, not powerful. So Charles, he met the Muslims.
Was this on the Battle of Tours?
This is what we call the Battle of Tours. It was actually at a place called Poitiers.
You have the
France.
this is called the Palace of Martyrdoms of Shuhada.
They call this Ma'arakat Balat al-Shuhada, the Battle of the Court of the Martyrs. In English, we know it as the Battle of Tours, where Charles, he led his army. Now, military tacticians, they look at the situation because the Muslims were caught by surprise. Charles, he came beyond the mountains, and the Muslims, they weren't aware, and they were actually caught by surprise. So this is one of the things which actually caught the Muslims. Now, the eventual, what happened after this battle, of course, is going to define a lot of Al-Andalus. What we're going to do is we're going to look at this after a very short break, inshallah, continuing the history of Andalus. So, dear viewers, stay tuned. We'll be back in a short moment. We'll see you then.
Our legacy. Our legacy.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back, dear viewers. We're looking at the history of Al-Andalus as a part of Islamic history. So we see the Muslims, they've now marched through the south of France. They've started to push through to the north of France. They've been faced by a very big Christian army, who many historians say was the last frontier for Europe. If the Muslims were to be successful at this battle, Europe was theirs for the taking. If they were defeated, they would be pushed back. So we see what happened at this point is Charles, the Frankish leader. He led an army that caught the Muslims by surprise. Now, when you're caught off guard, it's very difficult to fight. The Muslims were carrying a large amount of treasure. Now, when you're carrying a large amount of treasure, this means you're planning to fight for a long time. The Muslims were planning to go through Europe, it seems. Allah knows best. Now, because they were caught off guard, what they should have done, many military tacticians say, is refuse to fight. They could have actually gone around, fought the rest of the armies, and then finished Charles off. And we find this is precedented. The Mongols, which we're going to look at later, were famous for this. They would actually refuse to fight certain armies, continue going through, and then double back and finish off this army once they knew they had the chance, and to catch them off guard. However, the Muslims at this time decided, no, we're going to fight. So they faced the Frankish army, they faced Charles and his army, and there were a number of reasons why the Muslims were defeated here. Number one was because of their own treasure. Many of them worried about defending the treasure rather than fighting.
Were the Muslims outnumbered?
It's said that the numbers you find in the historical books, some of them really inflate the numbers. You know, they inflate the numbers tenfold sometimes. It seems that, Allahu Alam, the Muslims were outnumbered at this point. And the Muslims, they weren't entirely aware, because there were many Christians waiting beyond. So once they thought they'd finished off enough, another fresh wave of Christian army would come. And the Christians would actually fool them. They would pull back, the Muslims would think, that's it, we can go forward. And again, they would find the treasures of the Christian army. And they would fight over the treasure. And then the Christians would pounce upon them.
So it is like at the Battle of Uhud, about treasure, about
again,
booty.
like
It
the
is
Battle of
always
Uhud.
about greed, about
Yes.
greed, either for power, either for treasure.
You'll find this is one of the causes of defeat. And you find this happens time and time and time again. When you chase this dunya, the Prophet ﷺ told us, the way that the Muslims would, lose their honor is by chasing the dunya. By trying to find, riba, by chasing the tails of the cows, trying to chase the dunya. And when you chase the dunya, you're going to be defeated. He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, once said, there will be a time where the nations of the world would pounce upon the Muslim ummah. And the Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, will it be because we're few in number? They couldn't understand, how can Muslims be defeated? They said, is it because we're small in number? And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, rather you will be large in number in that time. So they said, why would we be defeated? And he said, it is because of al-wahan. And they said, and what is al-wahan, Ya Rasulullah? And he said, hubb ad-dunya wa karahiyat al-maut.
And that's exactly what's happening today in the world.
We find it happen then. We find it happen in Uhud, in Italy, in Andalus. We find it happening today. When the Muslims love this world and they chase everything this world has and they become afraid of death, meaning you're afraid to die for the sake of Allah. You're afraid to die as a shaheed. When this happens, what's going to happen? You're going to be humiliated until you return back to your religion. So we see this battle was a case of this, where the Muslims became enamored by the ghanima, by the treasures. And so they were defeated.
They were fighting, and they wanted the treasure more than wanting to fight for the sake of Allah.
It could have been the case. And when you find that's happening, you find the Muslims become defeated. So again, historians, until today, they really debate if the Muslims had have taken Poitiers, the Battle of Tours. Many say there was nothing stopping them from taking the rest of Europe.
I think that it was like about 70 kilometers to Paris, in Poitiers or something, 80,
It was
70.
very close to Paris. Paris at that time was really not a very important city. Paris was like a small village at that point. You find that Andalus was basically the center of the western of Europe. And of course, it developed under the Muslims to become the center of Europe. It was a light in what they called the Dark Ages. Because we know the Dark Ages is after the fall of the Roman Empire. Because the Roman Empire really held Europe together for such a long time. Once the Roman Empire fell, there was nothing. The barbarians took over, and so the people called it the Dark Ages. But they say amongst this darkness came the Muslims. And the Muslims brought light to Europe.
But if you look at history of Eurocentric view, if you look about from Muslim-centric view, there is no Dark Ages in that time for the Muslims. The Dark Ages maybe is now, or it was for the Muslims maybe 300 years ago.
Yes. So you see, alhamdulillah, how Islam brought light back to Europe. And people all over Europe, Christians, Jews, Muslims alike, they would immigrate to Andalus as a place of learning, as a place of, freedom of religion. It was seen as a bastion of light in the Dark Ages.
And what happened after the defeating of the Muslims in this battle?
After the Muslims were defeated in Poitiers, they had to push back. And after this, they never again pushed forward. Never again did they take France.
They stopped in this.
They stopped there. And again, they pushed back to the Pyrenees Mountains. And this was, again, like a natural border. And the Muslims never went beyond this.
So why not? How come they didn't try again to take over France?
There are a number of reasons, and we're going to be looking at these in the coming episodes. Number one is we know that it's not enough just to have an army. Because if the army is disunited, they're not going to be able to fight. If your army isn't fighting sincerely for the sake of Allah, if they're trying to chase the dunya, they're doing it for their own personal reasons, you're going to find there's no success. Allah's not going to put barakah into this. So you find the Muslims were pushed back. And remember we said, you had the tensions between the Berbers and the Arabs. Then amongst the Arabs, you had each Arab, nation settling in a different city. And this started to cause racism. This started to cause disunity amongst the Muslims. Once you become disunited, what's going to happen?
It's repeat itself.
History repeats itself. So you find at this time, and we're going to go into more detail about this later, when the Muslims became disunited, remember we said there was a small group of Muslims left in the northwest of Spain? They began to slowly conquer the Muslims. The Muslims would become disunited, and they wouldn't be strong enough to fight against the Christians. So you find that, they would actually be attacked, and it wasn't until, late on, they'd actually force themselves to unite for the sake of Allah. Only then, when their neck is on the line, they'll put all of these things aside, and they will fight, they will unite, but then they will again fall back.
Just like during the Prophet's time when he united all of the tribes onto Islam, and they basically took over a lot of the world.
Yeah, you say that when the Muslims were united, when the Muslims were, truly fighting for the sake of Allah, the lands were opened. The lands were opened easily. You find they went, sometimes the land was given to them. Like as we mentioned, Al-Quds. No blood was spilled in Al-Quds. The land was given to the Muslims. They said, come and take this land, because they saw the justice of the Muslims.
So basically, France just wanted to protect their land before the Muslims got to it, and the Muslims never ended up conquering it.
Yes, the French realized, we're going to have to push forward. And the Christians, they honor Charles. Charles, they actually name him now Charles Martel. Martel, it comes from the Latin word martellus. It means hammer. So they call him Charles the Hammer. Because, out of all of the tools in the European toolbox, he was the only one with a bit of strength.
He didn't. He's not the one that defeated the Muslims. The Muslims defeated themselves.
Of course, the Muslims brought it amongst themselves. But the Christian view, the way they see it, is Charles defended the Christians. He defended Europe. He's the one who, saved them. They say savior because they were afraid of the Muslims. But as we see later, they actually respected the Muslims. They would migrate because life in France was miserable. Life in, Eastern Europe was miserable. People would come to Andalus to learn. Andalus was a center of learning. It was, the place of prosperity.
It is also interesting that some people who are main figures in the pre-Protestantic time in Europe, who are responsible for Reformation in the Catholic Church, they studied in the Islamic countries.
Yeah.
Because in that time, the old people were coming to Islamic country to study. It was like nowadays, like America or maybe Italy.
Yeah. And once they went to the Muslim lands, they saw this freedom of religion. Then they went back home and they said, we don't have this freedom here. We want this freedom. Like during the Crusades, once we touch on the Crusades, we'll go into a little bit more detail. But many people said the Crusaders, because at that time they were generally united, meaning the Catholics. Most of Western Europe was united. They went to the Middle East and they saw the freedom of the Muslims. They saw how the Muslims would read the Quran. Catholics were forbidden to read the Bible.
Whoa.
Only a priest was allowed to read the Bible. They went to the Middle East and saw, average Muslims, children, reading the Quran. So they said, why can't we read our own books? They went back to Europe and they said, they started to rebel against the Pope, saying, we should be able to read our own books. We should have religious freedom, the same way that the Muslims had it. So many people see this correlation between the Protestant Reformation and life in the Muslim world. So many people say, all of these Protestant reformers were inspired by the Muslims from the Crusades. They were inspired by Andalus. There's an example which sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant, to bring this up. You found, for example, Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is not very famous in most of the world, because of the exploits that he did. Even Adolf Hitler, he said, Andalus was the perfect example of a European society. He said, if only the German people would have been blessed with Islam instead of Christianity, we would have conquered the world. We would have been noble.
Because he's know in that time the Germans were disunited because half of them were Protestants and half of them were Catholics.
Yeah, and more than this, he's talking even about the creeds. He said, how wicked is it? The Muslims, they believe Allah is one. As for the Christians, they believe that God can be turned into a piece of bread and eaten. He said, how wicked is this belief? How have we been blessed with Islam? How have we been blessed with the religion of Muhammadism, as he called it, that glorifies, the warrior? Then we would be, conquering all of Europe. He said how miserable a thing that we were actually given this. And you find that he was very close with the Muslims because of this. Again, I don't like to emphasize this point too much because you mention Hitler's name, it's seen as something negative. But even he saw Andalus. He said how beautiful the example was of Al-Andalus, with all people living in harmony under Islam.
And many historians also actually say that.
Many historians, they looked at this, as we said, the convivencia, where you had Jews, Christians, Muslims studying together. And you find that, the Jewish religion was codified in Al-Andalus. The Kabbalah, there's one of the Jewish books, the Kabbalah. This was written in Andalus. It was inspired by Sufism.
Kabbalah is written in Andalus?
The Kabbalah was written in Andalus.
Yeah.
It was actually inspired by many of the Sufi books. The pillars of Iman for Judaism were written by Rabbi Moshe ben Maimonides. He took these from the Muslims. The Muslims have the pillars of Iman. He took these directly from the Muslims. So you see, Andalus became a place of mutual respect, harmony, but of course this wasn't going to last. So this is the introduction to the conquest of Al-Andalus. In the coming episodes, we're going to look at Andalus in its prime, and in the last episode, the downfall of Al-Andalus. So may Allah reward you all for joining us in this. May Allah reward you, the viewers. We hope that you've taken as much from this episode as we have, and we look forward to having you in the coming episodes, looking at the rest of Al-Andalus and the rest of Islamic history. May Allah reward you all. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.